Hi, this is Dr. Brian Skotko, and I want to thank you for coming back to Brain Train. I hope you really enjoyed the first step, which was socializing with your loved one with Down syndrome, and I want to thank you for coming back because the second part we're going to talk about in our SMART actions are going to be the moving more. You know there are 5 parts: socialize, moving more, activating the brain, reducing sugar, and treating medical issues, and this is all about move, move, move. But let's start with the research first. You all know I like to go back to the research and extrapolate. Research has shown that exercise improves the adaptability of certain brain regions, what is known as neuroplasticity. Plastic means stretchy and changing, and we know that the brain and the neurons and the connections are able to stretch and adapt if we have exercise. Exercise, you might say, how does that work? Exercise actually activates certain cells, certain things in our brains that act as natural cleanup mechanisms. And our plaques, which develop in our brain, need these cleanup mechanisms, and we know exercise can really kick them into force and have them start dusting up those plaques in our brain. There was a meta-analysis done. What this means, it takes all the research that's been published, in this case from 1947 to 2009. There were 59 studies, and they combined them all together, and they showed that more physical activity was associated with better cognitive outcomes in school-age children. Put another way, the school-age children who had more exercise were more apt to be having higher cognitive outcomes. Again, exercise, even at a young age in neurotypical population, seems to boost cognition. There was another meta-analysis done of 29 randomized controlled trial in adults. This is in adults where we had them do something special. In this case, it was aerobic exercise. And when those who engaged in aerobic exercise versus those who did not, those who did had improved attention, processing speed, executive and memory function. Executive function is how well we can keep things at the tip of our brain and be able to execute on what we're thinking. And the memory function is, again, the ability to recall. Again, exercise in this particular paper really made a difference. Even easy short-term exercise has cognitive benefits. You don't need to run a marathon to get the benefits. And let me show you why. This was this study that came out last year in 2018 of 36 healthy college students who were recruited. Half of them just sat on a stationary bike. They did nothing. They didn't even pedal. And the other half were just asked to softly pedal for about 10 minutes. That's it. Half sat, half softly pedaled. And what they did is they had them both in each camp complete some computer memory tests, and they also had some brain MRIs to see what's going on in their brains. Those who just did the easy pedaling performed better on the memory tests than their counterparts who just sat on the bike. So even just easy pedaling in an activity itself really kind of fueled the brain with exercise. And these students, when we looked at their brain MRIs, they also activated the learning centers more than if they sat on a stationary bike. So somehow doing something, they have kinetic motion, activated the learning and made the learning stick, both on what we saw in the MRIs and actually how they performed on these tests. It really shows that exercise has a lot of these cognitive benefits. So what are the recommendations? The American Heart Association has some recommendations for children, and they have recommendations for adults, and I want to go over those together. Children between the ages of 3 or 5 should be physically active and have plenty of opportunities to move throughout the day. Now, when we get to ages 6 to 17, the recommendations become a little bit more circumscribed. There must be 60 minutes per day of moderate to vigorous intensity physical activity, and most of it should be aerobic. And we're going to get into what constitutes as moderate or vigorous intensity. The vigorous intensity activity should occur on at least 3 days per week. Again, 6 to 17, 60 minutes with the vigorous at least 3 days per week. It also should include muscle and bone strengthening, or what we call weight-bearing activities, at least 3 days per week. All right, so there's lots of recommendations here, and we're going to break these down. And then once you have these down, we slowly want to increase the intensity and the amount over time. When it comes to the recommendations for adults, so individuals 18 and older, again, these are recommendations for all of us, not necessarily people with Down syndrome. You should get at least 150 minutes per week of moderate intensity aerobic activity and 75 minutes per week of vigorous activity, or a combination of both. And I'm going to show you what the difference is between moderate and vigorous. We want to start to add to that moderate and high intensity some muscle strengthening activities, such as resistance to weights. That's going to strengthen bone density. It's also going to improve kind of overall brain health, and that needs to be done at least 2 days per week. We need to spend less time sitting. Even light intensity activity can offset some of the risks of being sedentary. We know that sitting for long periods of time can have deleterious effects on our brain health. So we even want to get moving even a little bit if we're not up to that moderate or that vigorous level of what we need to do. You might look at this and say, this is so easy, but the overwhelming majority of Americans are not meeting even these basic recommendations from the American Heart Association. And I know from seeing so many patients with Down syndrome, the majority of them are not even coming close to meeting these recommendations. You gain even more benefits by being active even more. So the more you do, the more benefits you're going to get for your brain health and staving off that Alzheimer's. And we again want to increase the amount and intensity over time. So let's talk about that intensity. So moderate is on the left of your screen, vigorous is on your right. So if you do some brisk walking, that's going to be moderate. If you're going to do some water aerobics, or you're helping gardening, or you're biking but not that fast, or you're shooting baskets, all of those are kind of moderate activities. Vigorous activities are going to be running, swimming laps. Zumba is really great. You're moving, cycling a little bit faster. Jumping rope is a vigorous activity. If you're hiking uphill, again, your heart's going to beat a little bit more. Playing soccer where you're moving, or a basketball game, those are all vigorous activities. So this is to give you a sense of the moderate and the vigorous. I want you to pause and think about the activities that your loved one with Down syndrome does, and think about whether or not they fall into the moderate or vigorous. If they're not even on here, they might be even lower than moderate, and we need to build up to these levels in order to meet the American Heart Association's guidelines. Some notes about Down syndrome. I am so grateful for Special Olympics, and I am so grateful for their inclusion programs, and I'm grateful for all my athletes that get a lot of good social activities in Special Olympics. Because you remember from the last video, having friends and socializing is really important. But let's be honest, there is a lot of standing around in Special Olympics. Sometimes I will go to a Special Olympics exercise or a basketball game, etc., and there's a lot of high-fiving and standing around and very little vigorous intensity. So just saying, oh, my son or daughter is on the basketball team, or my son or daughter is on the soccer team for Special Olympics, they might not be getting a lot of minutes of moderate or vigorous activity because there's more social or standing around or being a part of a big group. So I think we need to be honest with ourselves. I'm not saying get rid of Special Olympics. I'm just saying we might need to augment it with some very targeted, moderate, or vigorous activity in addition to. Not all people with Down syndrome sweat. We know that having that extra chromosome means that some people with Down syndrome don't sweat. So we can't judge it by, oh, you know you've had a vigorous or a moderate activity workout if you've kind of sweated. Some people with Down syndrome are really working out and they're not sweating. And if they're one of those people who don't sweat, we need to prevent overheating, because what is sweating doing? It's cooling down our bodies. So we want them to get to that moderate or vigorous. If they're not a sweater, you want to make sure that they have waters and cool towels as they're going through some of the activities. So here's your homework. For 1 week, I just want you to record the cardiovascular exercise that your loved one with Down syndrome is doing. Don't do anything special, just record. Okay, we went for a vigorous walk. They went to Special Olympics, and I watched them, and he really only ran for about 5 minutes out of the 60 minutes that I took them there. Record actually what's going on, because until we have an audit, an honest audit of what's going on, we don't know where we're going to be able to build from there. Then after this week, challengers, I want you to commit to increasing the duration and the intensity of these aerobic exercises so we could get to the recommendations from the American Heart Association. How could you do this? How could you keep track? There's a lot of wearables out there. And again, I don't have any relationship with any of these organizations, but I want to give you some samples. If these work for you, great. If these work for your loved one with Down syndrome, great. You might have other ideas. But Google Fit, actually, you could go to this website here, and you can learn all about it. But what I like about Google Fit is not only do they track the minutes, which you could see here in the dark blue, they actually will give you the heart points. So all those American Heart Association, all of those rules, moderate, vigorous, etc., it knows if you're wearing one of their wearable devices, how fast you're moving, so whether or not it counts as a moderate or vigorous activity. And based on your age, they then come up with a point system. So more important than moving, I always hear people with Down syndrome say, oh, I'm doing so many steps. Even more important than that is your heart points. How much are you doing that moderate or vigorous activities in the day? So I really like this because it's one of the few wearables that incorporates the American Heart Association. And if they don't have an Android phone or a Google phone on them, Google now has a wearable. So they have this cool watch, which might make for a great gift for your loved one with Down syndrome that they could wear. And they turn it on and it will count their vigorous activities. And so at the end of the week, you could review with them how much actual activity they got. And there's the website there. For those of you who love Apple, you know that Apple has an activity function on their health app. You could go there, it will track your activity. It's not going to have those hard points, but it is going to tell you how many minutes of exercise, how many calories you might have moved, and how many steps you moved. And certainly that is at least keeping you accountable. And you could then say, were those steps at a slow pace, a moderate pace, or that vigorous activity? Fitbit's another great activity for those of you who want to wear Fitbit. Again, it's going to give you some more of the moderate, the movements, how many paces you've taken, how far you've gone, how many minutes. I won't give you the intensity of the American Heart Association, but it's great. And they even have these activity trackers for kids as early as 8 years of age, and they come in cool colors. So lots of different ways that you could track it with your son and daughter. Again, make it something that you decide together, make it a shared goal, find something that works for them, and use the data. It's not just wearing it, it's using the data. All right, so I want to review your homework. One, I want you to record the cardiovascular exercise each day for 1 week. Be honest audit, take a look at it. And then look at the standards of the American Heart Association. If you are like the majority of families who have a loved one with Down syndrome, the person with Down syndrome are not meeting those standards. That's okay. We got to start somewhere, and I know you could do it. Then think about a wearable device that will keep us honest, and then every week try to increase the daily exercises so that you're meeting those weekly goals. And why are we doing this? Because the research shows that exercise improves brain health and potentially could stave off Alzheimer's. So good luck with the homework this week. Again, I love when you share all the things that you're doing. Post your photos, post your videos, tell me what you're doing on social media so we can all learn together. Let's all move together. Coming up next, in the next video, we're going to talk about activating the brain, how we have exercise for our cognitive health. I'll see you soon.